Today on Applied Science, I thought we'd take a look behind the scenes. And so in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, why I make YouTube videos. Then we'll geek out on audio video equipment and workflow, and finish up with a shop tour. And this will be a free video for my Patreon supporters, of course, which brings us to our first question. Is this my day job? Nope, this is a self-funded hobby, kind of a side project sort of thing. My day job is at Verily, also known as Google Life Sciences. I have a pretty cool role there where I do electromechanical prototyping, actually similar stuff to that I show in the videos, to try to make healthcare less expensive. Prior to that, I worked at Valve Hardware, specifically on the Lighthouse tracking system that's used in the HTC Vive VR headset. And prior to that, I worked for myself. In fact, out of this garage, I owned a business that created MRI-compatible computer peripherals. So if you want to study someone's brain function, you put them into an MRI scanner and scan their brain while they're interacting with a computer program, doing math equations, for example. So they need some way of controlling a computer from within the MRI scanner. And that's actually what all this hardware that I created did. So some of it was actually completely non-metallic. So I built computer mice and joysticks and things that were completely fiber optic. This was like the high-end version. And I also did copper equipment too that was just optimized for MRI use. I graduated from UC Santa Barbara with a mechanical engineering degree, but have ended up doing about half and half mechanical and electrical engineering for all the day jobs that I've had. And even though UC Santa Barbara was a great place in general, I don't think university prepares people well for what they need to do in the real world. So I actually advocate learning on your own, and most of the stuff that I talk about in these videos, the techniques and the processes I've sort of learned on my own or on the job, especially from other really experienced engineers. Probably the number one question that I get is why I make YouTube videos, and there's quite a few answers to this. The biggest one is that it's just fun, right? Like I started doing this as a hobby, and this was back in 2011 when basically nobody got paid on YouTube except for like the mega stars that had, 1 million subscribers. I think Kip K was actually the most subscribed YouTube channel at the time with like close to 1 million. Sounds pretty quaint now, but anyway, there was no money to be made. So the only people that made videos were the ones that liked doing it. And it's kind of interesting how things have changed over the years. Nowadays, most people are pretty interested in getting some revenue share. And, it is nice that the hobby sort of funds itself and I can buy nice camera equipment that we'll see in a minute and all that sort of thing. But it is quite a bit of a different world now. Another channel that I watch somewhat regularly, Steve Ramsey, especially in the earlier days, had a really good 10-year recap of what it's been like to do 10 years on YouTube. Very enlightening. I'll link to it. In general, I'm in favor of systems that have sort of a competition angle and reward creators or producers based on their output or their performance. But on YouTube, I think it's good to have a mix of people that still do this as a hobby and also as a business. The reason being that my thumbnails would actually look like this if I were doing this as a full-time gig. Probably not as good of a result for you guys in the long run. The fact that I don't actually have to do this as my full-time job means I can be sort of more lax with the schedule and only produce things that are really interesting. I don't have like a regular release schedule. Another reason that I make YouTube videos is to give myself time pressure to get projects done. So if I know there's a whole bunch of viewers out there that really want to see something, it gives me more motivation to put time in and get these things done. Another reason that I make YouTube videos is to showcase my work. So pretty much every good job that I've ever got was because I was showing off all of this work on YouTube. It's basically like a living resume. And I always advocate for people to show off their work. It doesn't have to be in video form. It could be in photos or blog posts or GitHub, whatever. But just showing potential employers what it is that you do is really critical. Much, much better than just explaining in bullet points on a resume. Another reason that I make YouTube videos is to hear all of your comments. Actually, I'm really proud of the comment sections on my videos because they're by and large very good conversations. I've probably only ever deleted about 5 or 10 comments in the entire history I've been on YouTube. And I get a lot of ideas for future videos and stuff like that through there. So being able to interact with the community this way is very useful. Another reason that I make YouTube videos is it serves as sort of a project log or a diary for myself. And so sometimes when I'm searching for a technique, I'll actually find one of my own videos on the topic and sort of refresh my memory that way. And sometimes it's equal parts frustrating and surprising to have that. But anyway, there's a lot of reasons why I do it. And so if all the viewers sort of enjoy this and I'm enjoying it at the same time, it's win-win. And the support that I get through Patreon and YouTube sort of allows me to keep buying decent equipment. So whenever you find one of these win-win situations, it's always good to keep investing in it. And so that's why I make YouTube videos. My standard process for making a video begins with me kind of tinkering with an idea for a few days or weeks and shooting what's known as B-roll in the industry. So this is basically like little video clips that don't typically have audio with them. Little clips of me machining parts for a project or testing things out, or clips of close-ups of the action. And then after I feel like I've got a handle on the thing, I'll shoot the A-roll, which is me talking over it and showing the whole thing off. Typically I don't script anything, it's all just spoken at the time I'm shooting it, but I've had a few days or weeks to kind of put it together in my head. One downside of shooting this way is that I don't often capture the initial excitement of seeing something for the first time. So another reason that I make these videos and do these experiments in the first place is because discovering stuff for the first time or seeing something for the first time is really cool. Recently, Smarter Every Day had a great video where Destin showed that excitement of sort of seeing a new effect for the first time. So unfortunately, I don't really have that aspect in my videos, but I do think I make up for it by having a really tight presentation and a well-reasoned sort of thing. Here's the camera rig that I've been using for the last year to make videos. This is the Lumix G85. And I've been a big fan of the Micro Four Thirds format since it first came out. And so I used the GH1 when it first came out. In fact, the video that you're watching right now is being shot on my other GH1 backup camera. And these are so cheap now, you can get one of these on eBay. And it's neat because the sensor is relatively large. The Micro Four Thirds format is much bigger than, like, consumer cameras. And back when the GH1 came out, this was actually pretty revolutionary, even though it's more standard now. But anyway, the neat thing that you can do with this is adapt lenses that are made for bigger cameras to the Micro Four Thirds sensor and get much higher performance out of it. So this is the Sigma 18-35 lens, and normally this is an f1.8 lens, which is already very fast, right? And it's f1.8 through the whole zoom range, and it's actually very sharp at f1.8 too. Some people have tested this and found that it's sharper at f1.8 than even Canon lenses are at f2.8 even. But there's another trick we can play which is even better. They make these things called speed boosters, which I think I can... So the audio is actually being recorded on this camera now, even though you're watching video on that camera. Okay, so I can't remove the lens because it cuts the audio off, so I'll just have to describe it. This thing between the lens and the camera body is called a speed booster, and it's basically just a few pieces of glass in here that compress the light cone coming from this lens down to the sensor size that's in the camera. So this lens is made for APS-C cameras, so it produces a light disc, a light output that's slightly bigger than the sensor. So this lensing in here basically just crushes that light cone down, which means that the lens appears to be even faster. It's more like f1.2, and you get a wider field of view. So this is a pretty good trick. You can actually get f1.2 from 18 to 35, and it's attack sharp almost in the entire range. And then there's one other cool trick we can play. Normally, this sensor uses the entire Micro Four Thirds sensor to record video, and averages the pixels together to make a 1080p image. But if you only use the center 1080p pixels of the image sensor, you get sort of like a zoom for free. So this thing has this teleconverter setting, and so I don't think I can actually switch it while it's recording. But anyway, when I press that button when it isn't recording, you can zoom in. You get basically double, like a 2x zoom, without any loss in quality or light sensitivity. So when you put all this together, you get almost a continuous 18 to 70 millimeter lens at f1.2, and it's sharp in the whole range. This thing practically sees in the dark. It's really the nicest camera setup that I've ever used. I always shoot 1080p 60, and so having really good light sensitivity is nice because at 60 frames a second indoors, you really need to capture a lot of light. And the latest image sensors are pretty low noise, so you can go up to ISO 1600 on this, and it still looks pretty good, whereas in the old days, ISO like 400 or 800 was kind of the limit. For audio, I've been using this Rode Link, I don't know the exact name of it, this wireless lapel mic that shows up quite a bit. I think they might call it the video mic. Now the video mic is like a shotgun or something that sticks on there. But anyway, the lapel mic is very handy for the way that I shoot. You can kind of see it here. Very handy because it stays the same distance away from my mouth. Whereas if I use a microphone on the camera, people complain about that because if I'm moving around the shop and the microphone is on the camera like this, one, it's not balanced between left and right. So actually having a stereo microphone is kind of a downside. And then two, if I turn away from the camera or if I take a few steps away, the audio level changes, and you can't use automatic gain control because that makes the audio not sound as good either. So I tried a few other things when I was kind of experimenting with making YouTube videos. And at one point I even got this expensive shotgun mic and was thinking I would have more of like a high production value, like sort of sit down in front of the camera with proper lighting and everything, kind of like this video looks. And then I found out that having too high of a production value on YouTube is counterproductive. In fact, people don't like it very much. YouTube doesn't look like broadcast television for a reason, right? I mean, it's YouTube. It was originally videos uploaded by non-professionals just because uploading videos was something fun to do. It wasn't meant to be like production television. So, you know, and it kind of, you know, the style of video that I make is really not meant to be television either. It's sort of like quick snippets. It's 10 or 20 minute videos that just sort of show something cool. So anyway, I kind of ditched the idea of doing this studio presence thing, and the current setup that I have with the lapel mic works out a whole lot better. Once the video is shot, I take everything on SD card to my editing computer and use Blackmagic Resolve to do the video editing. I used to use Adobe Premiere, but became frustrated with it because they went to a subscription-only model, and Resolve is actually free software, so it's kind of hard to beat the price. And honestly, for doing simple editing like I do without very many visual effects, I actually kind of prefer the interface of Resolve. Let's finish up with a shop tour. This is my 800 square foot detached garage in the San Francisco Bay Area. And remember that I used to work out of this garage, so a lot of the equipment that I've bought and tools that I've bought were legitimate business expenses, and so this really was my main place of business for many years. So anyway, let's take a look at what I've got. I recently picked up this 60-watt laser cutter off eBay. Surprisingly inexpensive. I think the whole thing was about $1,500 and another few hundred for the water chiller. And this thing actually works surprisingly well. You can kind of see an example of something I've cut out with it there. It definitely has very strange quirks. In fact, check out this weird safety label for an example. It's definitely weird, and that safety label sort of represents how weird the whole machine is in all of its operating quirks. Another one of my favorites is this the safety switch. It says open cover for protection, and then it has a 1 or a 0. So you're not really sure if you flip that switch to 1 or 0, does that mean that the safety switch that disables it when you open the lid is on or off? Anyway, it's pretty quirky. I've also got this Maker Gear M2, which I like a lot. We've got a few of these at work as well. For FDM, it's a really great printer. Kind of see some examples of stuff I've made there. There's the liquid nitrogen generator, the Stirling free piston cryo cooler in there. Got all kinds of assorted hardware over here. This is actually what's left of my home-built scanning electron microscope. And it's been mostly taken apart. The cabinet is mostly in one piece, but the column itself I've taken apart and used the parts in other spots. This is my sort of production scanning electron microscope, a T100, I think it is. I actually forget the model exactly. But this has actually been a real workhorse for me, and so it's nice to have a reliable SEM just kind of ready. And then some of the parts that I've taken from the home-built SEM are now in this sputtering chamber. And so I've got both thermal evaporation and sputtering capability in there. There's a ultra low temperature cold trap or cryo fridge back there, under there as well. You can see a whole bunch of lab gear. We got a kiln on the floor, ultrasound cleaner, a bunch of hot stir plates, pressure washer, the Form Lab support equipment and the printer itself, the washer and oven that go with the 3D printer. There's also a low temperature kiln back there with asbestos tiles. This was sort of the studio setup area that I alluded to earlier in the video. I was going to stand in front of this thing and do kind of more formal type presentations, but I don't think that format ever really worked out. And then we got the ultra high pressure rig, which is probably my longest running project maybe ever. I've been working on this thing for a long time and have been making some progress. I just need a little bit more motivation to push it over the edge, but it will be coming soon. Giant doer under here. Bunch of woodworking tools, and also one of my favorite woodworking tools, or even tools overall, the shaper router, which uses this tape to do positioning, so you can hand hold it and then get CNC cuts at the same time you're hand holding it and driving it. Pretty cool. This lathe from Grizzly has also been a real workhorse. For what it cost, I seem to remember it being about $3,500 or something, and I added the DRO to it later on. It's actually a really great machine for what it cost. And I inherited a bunch of tooling from my neighbor who was a machinist, a professional machinist for his whole career. And very handy to have all that tooling. The famous 4x6 bandsaw. Bunch of stock here. 14-inch bandsaw. Shaper and a planer. There's the rubber band fridge down there. Got a wood lathe as well. Table saw. This is a 200 amp plasma cut and TIG machine that came off of eBay when these were still relatively new. I think they're quite common these days, but I got that back when it was kind of a new thing. This old Bridgeport milling machine I've retrofitted with a modern control, a Centroid control. The neat thing is that I was able to use the original motors, and the motors are very powerful. They're DC servo motors, and I upgraded the encoders in there and now have a really nice modern control with really strong, decent servo motors. Here's the chemical selection, bunch of glassware. Kind of a standard drill press there. You can see what I'm working on now. I've got this tube furnace set up for carbon nanotube production, which again is a super long-running project, I realize, but it's coming along well. The tube furnace works quite well. Heading into the electronics area here. Love the soldering iron. JBC makes really nice soldering equipment. Hot air rework, scope, kind of standard stuff for electronics. Nice big Variac under there. Sort of a modern electronics test area. I kind of find it's useful to have, if you're going to do firmware development, to have the computer sort of as close to the scope and the soldering as possible. In fact, if I were going to do a lot of work out here, I'd crush these together even closer. For my day job, I have the computer, the soldering station, and the oscilloscope as close together as possible so that you can get everything happening all at once. The Ruby laser, another project that needs resuscitation. So the problem here is that the Ruby rod is scratched. I need to resurface the faces. And I've called around, and almost no one's willing to do it for any price even, so I think I'm going to have to do it myself. Then I also recently got this small 450 nanometer laser engrave machine, which is surprisingly useful. It will actually mark stainless steel, which is something that the bigger CO2 laser won't even do. Kind of neat to have that. It's without any prep or special chemicals, it just marks it. And then we're back to the door here. So I thought it'd be kind of fun just to walk around the shop, since in all the little video clips that I've made, it's sometimes hard to get a handle of how big the whole shop is or kind of where everything is situated. And so I thought I'd give you a look just to see what this place looks like. Okay, see you next time. Bye.